Welcome to Film Strip, movie reviews presented by Continuous Play Podcast. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Kurt.
And this is our review of Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, starring Peter Sellers, George Scott, George C. Scott, Slim Pickens, Sterling Hayden, and James Earl Jones. Yes. Released in 1964 on a budget of $1.8 million, grossed $9.4 million in its North American box office run. Now, I'll go ahead and admit, Kurt, I knew of Dr. Strangelove, the film, referenced in so many different things, some of which I didn't realize until watching it, but I had never watched it before this review. I think I knew enough about it that I always felt like I don't have to watch that movie. I know what it's about. So Cold War satire is an interesting subject matter for me because as a kid who, I was born in the 70s, but I grew up in the 80s. So like the end of the Cold War is my childhood, war games, Red Dawn, all that stuff. And so to see a movie that was on the front end of it, or I guess, we still say it was about 15 years after the Cold War started, we're still on the front end of it here, was an interesting exercise for sure.
Yeah. About this movie, it goes through cycles. When it came out, it was kind of like in the 60s, they said it was like really ahead of its time, and it was really like a dangerous movie. Some people said there was rumors that the government didn't want it shown because it was a little too accurate, showing how frightening the people who control the most powerful weapons in the world, how incompetent they might be, or how in the wrong hands how this kind of stuff could happen. And over the years, the movie became like, it's like a satire. It's like, it's like just a great comedy. But what's interesting is that, I posted about it the other day, just saying I'm watching Dr. Strangelove, and someone posted making a comment. This movie was a lot funnier back when it wasn't realistic, because right now, it's like, God, I have no problem believing the scenes in the war room in Dr. Strangelove have occurred in the last few weeks. I mean, literally, there was a news story where the headline was U.S. claims to be running out of options with North Korea. It's like that only means a handful of things.
Yeah, it does. And you're right. I do think, and that was one reason I really wanted this to squeeze and get this one in. Well, actually, there's two reasons. I couldn't leave the Kubrick retrospective on Lolita after as bad a time as I had with that. And I wanted us to get one more in before the end of the year. And I thought, you know what? This one's actually kind of topical, sadly enough. I mean, it really is. And I thought, this is a good one to end on because while it is so it is kind of funny, and I mean, it is all played for laughs in this movie. It's a comedy. It's also something that is very timely, and the good chunk of it is really Peter Sellers playing the U.S. president, which is kind of an Adlai Stevenson rip, is what I understand, and George C. Scott playing like the most jingoistic, like Army general, Air Force general you can think of, like the guy. And I didn't realize the thing I knew this name from. His name's General Turgidson, and I thought Back to School. Sam Kinnison's character is Professor Turgidson. I had never put that together, and I'd rewatched Back to School recently, and I was like, I totally get it now.
Oh yeah, this movie it's definitely a cult favorite amongst filmmakers. Like I've seen several band names where they've taken something from the movie. Make like the term Megadeth. I mean, I don't know if that term was ever used before this movie, but I think there's a book that says like 10,000 megadeaths or something like that. Yeah,
it's deaths or casualties in megadeaths or whatever.
That's right.
So, which is, I mean, it sounds like such an awful term, but it also is kind of like Army specific scientific. Like it's what you would think the military would classify things as. It says, well, it's not just deaths, it's mega deaths, which are, millions or whatever. So, which is what they get into. Yeah. No, I mean, nowadays with the tension between North America or with the United States rather and Korea, and then also, our current president, not exactly the most beloved leader in the world right now. Most people think he's kind of crazy, a little bit of a loose cannon. I mean, you can see like why this film is topical nowadays to people, but think about it in the 1960s. And particularly, this movie was made in 1963. We're in the JFK America, and it actually got delayed in release because of his assassination. Like, they just thought, I mean, the studio was like, you just can't put this out. Matter of fact, there's a line, and you can see Slim Pickens' mouth talking about, that sounds like a good night in Dallas. They redubbed it to Vegas because they're like, we can't talk about Dallas. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I thought, man, what a different time. Because nowadays, like, we like to think stuff would get shelved because, no, it would probably get rushed into production and out nowadays just to make the statement.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the politics have changed. Like, that was a time, right smack after McCarthyism where I was just watching a video Sterling Hayden himself. He absolutely regrets it, but he was, he actually named names to the American, what was it, the HUAC. And he said that, after he did that, he got calls from everyone in Hollywood, like congratulating him, saying you're a great person. And he totally looks back at that as going, God, what an embarrassment. And he's totally ashamed. Yeah. Again, it's just such a different time for Hollywood.
Oh, it totally was. I mean, you're talking about McCarthyism and all of that stuff. Yeah, this is completely a take on every bit of that. And look, Kubrick is not one to shy away from controversial topic, but I think this is the first time he took something that he certainly had a lot of thoughts about, but he plays it off as comedy. And I also realized something else. I have a different appreciation for the Spielberg bomb 1941 now, having watched this movie, because I think what Spielberg wanted to do was a political satire, and he just picked a really bad way to do it. But I feel like Dr. Strangelove influences that a lot more than maybe people realize.
Oh, for sure. In ways big and small. The one I think of right away is he literally gets Slim Pickens to essentially almost like is always redoing the scene where he's going over the contents of the survival guide. I think he's going through I can't remember. He's going through some list of things, but Spielberg said we got to get Slim Pickens in the movie, and he has to read some kind of a list like he did in Strangelove.
I'm surprised that Zucker and Abrams didn't do that with the Airplane movies. Of all the things they spoofed, and there's certainly some Strangelove in that, they didn't get him to do a spot of reading some random list of containers in the bathroom of an airplane or something like that. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't around then. I don't know. But I just thought of all of those things. Again, I knew Strangelove had been referenced in so many things that I felt like I had seen it before I ever saw it. And so it was interesting to come to it this time around and think about, okay, I haven't seen this movie, so what is it going to be? And I mean, I just watched it straight, just cold, just went in and said, I'm just going to experience this movie for what it is. And then I went and read a lot of stuff about it afterward. But I have a feeling a lot of our audience maybe hasn't seen this or hasn't seen it in a while, or maybe doesn't want to think about it because it is so topical right now. So, Kurt, why don't you give people the plot summary? Tell them what Stanley Kubrick's Strangelove is all about.
For sure. So, when paranoid General Jack D. Ripper sets the wheels in motion for a squadron of B-52 bombers to deliver an atomic strike on Soviet Russia, the U.S. president and his group of advisors, along with British Royal Air Force Captain Mandrake, race against the clock to recall the squadron and stop the attack. President Merkin Muffley, General Buck Turgidson, and Dr. Strangelove President Merkin Muffley, General Buck Turgidson, and Dr. Strangelove debate on what to do on while the army invades the base and takes it over, but not before General Ripper kills himself before issuing the recall code. Mandrake eventually figures out the code, and all but one bomber is recalled. This plane, piloted by Major T.J. Kong, continues on its mission, having sustained critical damage from an anti-aircraft missile and cannot be radioed. Major Kong personally sees to it that his one bomb does release, personally writing it to its target. As nuclear explosions from retaliatory strikes go off across the world, Strangelove lays out his plan for mankind's survival to the advisors and the president as the credits roll.
So my first question for you, Kurt, and that's a good summary of it, is why is this movie called Dr. Strangelove? Why is it not called How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb?
I'm not exactly sure. I think the original title was Red Alert. And when you hear that, you might think...
Yeah, which is the book it's based off of, we should say. So, yeah.
Exactly. That's right. And I think they probably changed it from Red Alert, because you hear Red Alert, that sounds a little bit too much like a thriller. Again, I don't know if the book was. I have a hard time believing the book was as comical.
Oh, it's not. It's not at all. The book actually is very similar to Failsafe. If you've ever seen that, I've seen a couple. The couple of versions of that are out there, and it's much more serious. The idea is the same, but then you've got Kubrick and some of his other folks in here trying to write it and really Sellers, who's doing a ton of improv, trying to write comedy into this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think they went with that title, the title Dr. Strangelove. Well, just because it is. I mean, it's a strange title. It doesn't give you any clue as to what this movie is about. And that subtitle, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, I've never exactly understood it, because it's like it's a bizarre title. I love that it is that long, and I'm not sure who came up with that, but I do love that title.
I think that's a Kubrick thing. I think that's what he is saying, is that this is how I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb, which I believe is him saying, look, there's idiots in charge of this on every side and we're all screwed, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, that's really what I think he's getting into here, if we just want to be putting a fine point on it.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, really, it's hard to not think about this with all of the different pieces. And let's talk about the Peter Sellers parts here, because I mentioned him 3 times in the intro. That wasn't me screwing it up. He plays 3 different parts. He's supposed to play 4. He was supposed to play Kong, but he ended up hurting his ankle and couldn't do it for some reason. So they couldn't fit in the tight cockpit little thing they had, so they got Slim Pickens instead. But this whole film got financed because Lolita was a hit, and because the studio said, well, Sellers kind of plays multiple people there. He's done it before. We want Peter Sellers just to play a bunch of people. So you can have the money to do it if you get Peter Sellers to sign on and play, 4 parts. And Sellers was down for it. And I got to thinking, I was like, man, this is a different time in Hollywood when you would have an actor and you would want them to just do multiple things at once. And I mean, he's playing off of himself in some reason. In some of these scenes, he's just talking to himself. It's like Eddie Murphy or something.
Exactly. It's like it's been done a few times. Like, I know Alec Guinness, he made a movie called, what's it called? Arsenic and Old Lace, where he plays like an entire family. So it has been done before, but and I haven't seen that. But what Sellers did here, it is just it's something to see. Like, he was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Leading Actor, and it's interesting. He's kind of playing 3 supporting players, and yet he was up for and yet he has the most screen time. And I said this on the Lolita pod, and I kind of stand by it, which is I think Peter Sellers was sort of the best at what he did. When he wanted to turn on the funny, he was just unreal. And I got to say, whenever I'm in the middle of this movie, Sellers is doing such an amazing job. Sometimes it's easy for me to forget that Sellers is playing all 3, just because it's not just that he's playing 3 of the same kind of guy. They're such wildly different characters, each of them hilarious in their own way. Like the president, first he comes off as very presidential, but over the course of the movie, like while he's on the phone with the Russian Premier Kesov, he over the course of the movie, he turns into this pathetic wimp who sounds like a person with no actual authority or power. Yeah, he's just a loser. As Captain Mandrake starts off as this very proper British officer, and over the course of the movie, he gets more and more panicked, having to deal with such levels of insanity and stupidity with the people in the American military, and as Dr. Strangelove, that's where I almost think like that's Sellers going. I wouldn't say going crazy, but he's definitely given the most free reign. It has to be with that. That's where Sellers, because he turns it. It's not like it's not even a real person. It's pure, just like a sketch. It's just so bizarre. The one leather glove, the wheelchair,
and the alien hand that just keeps doing like it wants to Heil Hitler, but he's trying to control it. And
exactly,
he's got this sort of half. Sigmund Freud voice and half faux German. It's this whole. I mean, Strangelove's this whole thing. I want to get into him though, but I want to go back to the president. Man, his whole name is a riff. Muffley Merkin. Those are 2 slang terms for fake pubic regions in Hollywood. And I was like, that's a statement about the presidency at this point. You think this person's that ineffectual. And from what I was able to read, not only is Sellers ad-libbing, but a ton of the back and forth with him and George C. Scott in the war room there, which only Stanley Kubrick would shoot a movie with 25 people around a table and only 2 of them talk. And they talk across the table at each other, but both of them are like mostly ad-libbing their dialogue, which, a lot of people know George C. Scott from like he was in The Exorcist 3 and he did the great version of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, and he was Patton and all this stuff. I'm going to tell you something. This guy is a powerhouse actor, and watching him and Sellers go toe to toe was so much fun because they're both just chewing up the scenery with this dialogue. They're spitting at each other.
Oh yeah, the two of them are good. And George C. Scott is particularly underrated. Like casting Peter Sellers in a comedy, that makes sense. But where Kubrick's genius kicks in is where he decides he wants to go with actors like George C. Scott and like Sterling Hayden in a comedy, George C. Scott, he is truly one of the best American actors. Just check out anything he's ever done. He had this awesome mix of like kind of like raw like emotion of a great actor and this tough guy charisma. He's kind of the exact same guy as Lee J. Cobb, who he's the same kind of guy because after Lee J. Cobb died, Scott literally took over for him, playing his parts in The Exorcist and in the 12 Angry Men remake that Friedkin did. And he's for really. I haven't seen everything he's done, but pretty much apart from this, he's a truly like serious actor.
Yes.
But in this movie, he shows what an underrated comedic actor he was. He's such a goof in this movie.
I mean, he's got the secretary that he's banging on the side or whatever, and he takes the phone call, and then he like takes the call in the middle of the war room, like, sweetie, I told you never to call me here. Yeah, look, I'm going to be good, but you might want to say your prayers because we're all going to friggin' die, So, but I mean, I love this guy though, that he's everything about 1950s and early 60s American machismo. That I've ever read or seen about and heard about. He is the atypical, well, sir, that wasn't protocol, and he found a loophole, and, well, sir, you're not nearly as smart as you think you are because this is, 500 megatons, but it'll only kill this many people. And then he's also like the Russian diplomat, which he like makes up crap about this guy is spying on us, only to find out that he is actually freaking spying on them.
That was gorgeous. Yeah,
that's one thing that like I think Kubrick is playing with is the idea that like stereotypes are bad, but they're not always untrue. And I mean, and I kind of like that the subversive humor of it is that. But Turgison, for me, I'll just go ahead and say it now. This was the thing that I loved the most in the film. His scenes, and I'm going to get to Sterling Hayden in a minute as Jack T. Ripper and a bit, because I think he and Sellers have fun, in the Mandrake and the Ripper scenes. But Turgison to me was so much fun every time he was on the screen, and particularly those long scenes where he's basically explaining to the president, we had this one rogue general who has started World War III, and there's really nothing we can do about it because of all this bureaucratic red tape we've put in place to keep something like this from happening. Well, it also keeps us from being able to, stop it once it's in motion.
Yeah, he's always like ridiculously insubordinate to the president, which is hilarious. Like the president is rightly saying, like that this guy Jack D. Ripper that you put in place is the man's obviously psychotic. And George C. Scott, he's like, well, I think it's unfair to judge the whole program based on a single slip up.
Yeah, exactly. Or let's not judge the man until we've had time to evaluate him. I'm like,
exactly.
No, he's clearly nuts, to do this. No, that's the great thing though, is that, and that's what makes that back and forth so good, is you've got Sellers over there trying to be so like presidential and like authoritative, but he's really just a huge wuss who has no power. And I think I think what Kubrick is trying to say is that we hold the president up as if he's this, infallible human being, and he's just another guy. And what if somebody like this got elected? Well, this is probably what would happen. It's what we all want, right? We want this real touchy-feeling, nice person or whatever, this real nice person, but he can't make a friggin' decision when it matters. Like he never really takes the bull by the horns. And especially on when he's on the one-way phone calls with the Russian premier, I was like, well, no, Andre, he's like, Dmitry, calm down, And I love, like, he's talking to him like he's his, buddy from college or something.
Oh, for sure. It's exactly like the great Bob Newhart, phone bit where it's just all you hear is the one side of the conversation. And like he's talking, I love the setup. Like right before the conversation starts, the ambassador says he's drunk, which adds a level to it. When he's like, "How are you doing? You're fine. Good. We're both fine. I agree. It's great to be fine."
Well, of course I'd like to talk. Of course I'd just call just to talk to you, sure. But this is kind of urgent. And I'm like, well, how do you break that? It's like, we might have accidentally launched an attack against you, but we need you to chill out. It's going to be okay. And don't retaliate, please. Pretty please. I did get a real kick out of all of that. And I'll lay a lot of that on Sellers. I think you're right. His comedic timing is fantastic here. And I think he really nails like the Midwestern bland American accent. And then the three accents he's playing around with here, I mean, I think Mandrake's just him, right? I mean, that's just the way he talks. Because I got a lot of Clouseau off of him from time to time, being a big Pink Panther fan. And I thought, well, that's probably just him being himself. But they like hired this whole dialogue coach for him to try to be the King Kong guy, which they ultimately, went with just Slim Pickens to do. But I think it's been. I don't know. I thought it was really funny the way they laid all that out. Yeah, again, it is an amazing performance. It might very well be the best acting job someone's done in a comedy, because each of these characters, it's not just that he's playing three different characters. He's playing three different characters with such different comedic intentions. Like what I love about Mandrake is how he starts off so prim and proper, and over the course he just gets. He starts to crack up that great bit where he's talking to Sterling Hayden and Jatty Ripper's going on about fluoridation and his absolutely insane reasoning for wanting to start World War III, and because he's locked in the room with this guy, he just totally shuts down and just starts nervously laughing to himself, and it's I've never seen fear depicted more hilariously, or with the way he just refused, like when Ripper's telling him, "Come over here, help me with the gun," and he just totally freezes. The string's gone out in my leg, Jack. What? This string, like just refusing to participate because he has no idea how to deal with this guy. It's just hilarious. And the way you read the behind the scenes stuff, Sellers said he was in the RAF, so he just kind of mimicked his superiors and how like very in charge they were, but also how completely ineffectual they were. Like they couldn't do anything, but in the end, I mean, he's the one that figures a lot of this stuff out. He figures out the radio call that'll call the bombers back and all of that stuff. So he is smart. He's probably the smartest person in the room. And I mean, he has that whole back and forth with the Army guy that finally breaks in and has him at gunpoint, and he doesn't have enough quarters to make the phone call. So he's like, shoot the damn Coke machine so I can have enough quarters to make the call. And I was like, oh man, there's people going to listen to this show that have no idea what in the hell he's doing right there. Like they have no concept. And I was going to say, Kurt, do you remember phone booths? I mean, at all?
Oh, I do remember them, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, though, like, I remember, like, when I rolled around before I had a cell phone, I had a pager. And no, I wasn't a drug dealer. But I had a pager, and I would keep, like, change in my ashtray in my car just so I could return phone calls from random places around town. What did I ever do before I had a cell phone? But, I mean, this is what we did in the world, right? And it's funny to think about, we had 40 years where that was the way of communication publicly, was that. And now we've lapped that so fast in the last 10 years. It's amazing. But again, all that comedy works. But what's the under theme here, and this is what's amazing, is this idea of like mutually assured destruction. That, well, if we're going to launch this attack, then here's going to be their retaliation, and then here's how we're going to survive that so that we can take them out and have like 99% of their missiles destroyed, and that's an acceptable loss of life. Like, to hear these guys talk about this stuff in the war room as just like it was nothing it's kind of scary. It really makes the film almost horrific.
Oh, for sure. Because this movie was made, right when the Cold War was around its hottest, like the Cuban Missile Crisis and so forth. There was an honest to God chance that World War III might have broken out between, Russia and America. It was a serious time, which makes it all the more cool that right there in the middle of that serious time, Kubrick makes a comedy about that time. And I think it's also funnier knowing now that, of course, Russia never did nuke America, and all that ridiculous paranoia never really materialized into anything real. Well, until maybe recently. But the characters, in this movie are so ridiculously paranoid about whoever the other side is. Like the classic moment when Turgison tackles the Russian ambassador, tries to plant a camera on him, and the great line, the president says, "You can't fight in here. This is the war room." Turgison planting the camera probably to get him out because he's so paranoid about him learning American secrets. And of course, the gorgeous revelation that when you find out he actually is spying on him and takes a camera of the board when nobody is looking. And so like this idea that, these people, like nobody trusts anyone, nobody's communicating with everyone. And these are the guys that like the wrong mistake and literally the world ends.
Exactly. And that's the thing about mutually assured destruction. It's the reason none of it ever came to any head, Kurt, is that postulation saved millions of lives. Now, it cost a lot of lives too, and it cost a lot of money, and it bankrupted an entire union, the Soviet Union. But the idea that, well, we could launch on them, but then they're going to launch on us, and we're all going to be dead, kept a lot of people, kept World War III from happening up to this point. I mean, that's the thing, is that I think what Kubrick is trying to say is that as absurd and as like cold as all this sounds, it's actually the best policy that we do posture at each other and we don't actually push the button. Because if we did, there's nothing left, there's nowhere to go. And I don't know, I found that fascinating to watch play out here. And I mean, it's only with the retrospective history now that we know that was a good idea. At the time, I mean, you got school children that were being drilled up through the 1980s on, if there's a nuclear attack, get under your desk. I mean, as if. That was all that did was make you an easier target for the shockwave. I mean, that's all that did. But they didn't know what else to do. I mean, if you watch films like The Day After and things like that, I mean, there's tons of nuclear apocalyptic films, and this one was so far on the front of all of it. And the fact that it plays it all off as, look at how incompetent all the people that are in charge of this are. Doesn't that scare you? It should.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And this concept of the doomsday weapons, it didn't hit me till the last time that, like, I always thought of it, well, Russia has this doomsday weapon, but really this concept of the Plan R, what Jack Ripper puts into place, that is America's doomsday weapon, because it's part of this emergency plan where if America were attacked, all the planes shut their radios off and bomb Russia, and they switch their radios off, so there's little chance of not wiping out Russia. And I always laugh when Turgison is breaking down Ripper's plan. He says he makes, like, as he's breaking down how disturbing this is, and many lives lost, he does say, but on the other hand, this would be a great opportunity to take Russia out while the planes are flying anyway. Yeah. And that bit where he says, and actually there was an unofficial study of this eventuality that says if we did try this, we'd actually we'd suffer very acceptable civilian casualties. And I get the sense, at least from Turgison, that he's a guy where it's like he secretly wanted to do the same thing Ripper did, but he just wasn't crazy enough.
Look, he's a total war hawk. Like, we know that, right? That's what this man has spent his entire life living up to this point. That's why he's single. He's not married. He plays the girl off like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make you Mrs. Buck Turgison. I'm like, bull, man. You're James Bond in that chick. We know. So we know what's up. She doesn't, but we know. It's another one, by the way, and I'm just gonna keep bringing it up because it's going to be a continued theme. Kubrick cannot write women for anything. Like, he writes them off as just dumb. And I'm sorry, this poor woman in this film, it just plays off so stupid and throwaway. And in the end, she is. Like, we just don't even care what happens to her.
Sure, yeah. Again, yeah, that was always Kubrick's thing until well, yeah, I mean, the most well-rounded woman he had in a movie was the movie in his very final film, and then he dropped dead.
Yeah, exactly. Which we're a long way from, so we'll get around to Eyes Wide Shut someday. But I'm watching this, and I'm seeing things, and I'm like, yeah, I've seen that performance before. Won't be the last time I see it. In the Kubrick retrospective, it's just it's like Pinhead in a Hellraiser movie. It's coming at some point, so it's there. So whether it should be or not. So let's get into Strangelove here, though, real quick. What exactly is his affliction? He's in a wheelchair. He's got the one hand that's leather glove, like we say, that seems to Evil Dead and have a mind of its own. What is his deal?
Well, I'm not sure where the hell they came up with that one, or if that was Sellers himself. But again, the way Sellers plays him is just so unreal. Like for that last scene, where it turns into this great sketch. Like what happens in that last scene, you couldn't put that at the start of the movie, and you couldn't put that in the middle where things are straight, because it would just come off as silly. But as the movie gets sillier and sillier, when you reach that point in the movie where nothing isn't silly, it fits just fine to have Strangelove literally fight his own hand. And I think I read that Sellers, he came up with the idea that Strangelove, he came over from Germany after World War II to work for the Americans, but somehow his hand is still a Nazi. And when he gets animated and when his energy's up, the hand goes into Nazi mode. And like I love when he's talking to the president and he lets out a Freudian slip. He accidentally calls the president Mein Führer, right, and has to backtrack just as a reflex from his days back in the Third Reich talking to world leaders. And it's just hilarious how he's talking about the future of humanity in this mine shaft, talking about the principles of leadership and tradition, and the hand goes into a Sieg Heil, because to the hand that sounds like good old Nazi talk. And I also heard the theory that the Sieg Heil is basically, an erection metaphor. Oh. The way it happens whenever at these high points of excitement.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to call it out, man. I'm like, that hand is an erection. That's what that is. It's right there. Especially like there's that part where his longest monologue is like, you need 10 females to the one male, and they need to be of birthing, age. He's going through all this stuff, and his hand just keeps popping up. I'm like, yep, that's supposed to be a penis.
For sure.
There is a huge bit of sexual politics in this film, and we don't have to get into all of that because it's pretty obvious what it is. But I do like, though, that like his whole like plan for like saving the race is you got to have more women than men, because you got to have breeders. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, I thought Kubrick objectified women before, but now he's like got a character basically saying they're just here to make more, presumably men or more people for us to breed from. It's really, I know I can't watch this movie from 1964 with 21st century glasses on, but it's hard not to just recoil from that.
Well, I think so. I think that Kubrick isn't. I don't think Kubrick is trying to say that that's at all acceptable. I think he is totally, with this whole movie, like he depicts these guys in the military. They're either insane, they're idiots, or it's a British guy, and like. And I think he's satirizing them, saying, of course, like these guys. It reminds. I was thinking of Fight Club, actually. The way that I think of that movie is like Fincher is totally. The movie is like those characters, like a parody of masculinity and what happens when guys have too much testosterone and don't know what to do with it. I find that's pretty similar with these characters, like with the way Buck Turkington's, he's a single man and in the swinging '60s and all that, and the way when Strangelove he's depicting this. We need to pick women based on their sexual perversity, whatever. And every one of the generals and the president are hanging on his every word, thinking this is they're all secretly thinking this is the best idea we've ever heard. We got to put all of our funds into this.
I know, that's the thing, is like what he is saying is so absurd, but it also makes a ton of sense. Like I'm sitting there watching this and going, I mean, this is a Nazi telling me this, but he's not wrong about some of his assumptions here at this point. I mean, it's not comfortable to say, but that's the truth. I mean, what he's saying and look, at that moment in time, they've just launched a nuclear bomb on a Russian city. They're waiting to be retaliated against. He's talking about, run everybody to the mine shaft.
Yeah, it's part of that final scene of how it is. On one hand, it's like the only option left. On the other hand, it is so ridiculous. They go within 5 minutes. They go from we are the United States of America, the most powerful nation on earth, to we gotta find a mine shaft to bury into in order to wait for 100 years for the radiation fallout. Like this instant sense of like defeat. It's like, okay, so everybody's dead now. Let's find some salt mines.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's dead. Let's go hide underneath the earth because, it may take 90 years for us to peek back out, but, we'll select a lot of good men and a whole lot of, hot, voluptuous women, and we'll just have a good old time down there. It's just like a big orgy, mein Führer. That's what he's describing.
Oh, for sure. It's like, I love the way, like Turgison is acting as though he's hearing the word of God. He couldn't possibly be more excited about this. The way he's excited to get back to his secretary, he's hearing this, and it's like, wow, this is he's thinking like this is the end of the world here. It's going to be like a Mad Max underground. He's thinking this is going to be awesome. That's what he's thinking.
Oh yeah, because he's going to be able to upgrade from secretary lady because look, it's for the world, babe. We got to do it.
Yeah,
that's his whole thing, right?
He literally says, so that means we'd have to end all this thing about monogamy, right? In order to carry on the human species?
Yes, exactly. So, no, I'd find that all hilarious and the way that it plays out. And again, let's say Strangelove is just such a weird character, but I feel like it's Sellers really riffing on a lot of points, the sexual politics of nuclear war, mutually assured destruction. And then also the idea that we basically kidnapped all these German scientists to come to America to help us lead the space race. I'm from Alabama, not far from Huntsville, where a lot of that happened.
For sure.
So I knew that history growing up. So to see the riff on it here, the satire of it, it was funny. We haven't talked about Sterling Hayden enough, though. We've got to talk about him because I was so glad to see him come back in a Kubrick movie. Obviously, just doing a favor for his old friend here, and I love this guy because he is so serious. Kurt, I don't know if you spent much time on the web, like exploring conspiracy theories and stuff. There's a real good subsection at YouTube that's dedicated to this, but I have heard this guy's whole spiel like 100 different times.
Oh yeah,
just in the last couple of years. I mean, it's they're putting fluoride in the water. It's how they control us, and we're not going to let them do it. And I'm like, oh gosh, what if one of those loons got into a position of like power like that?
Oh, exactly. I do love that Kubrick, he brought him back after the killing to be General Ripper. Now, everyone is on fire in this movie. There's no really bad performance in the movie, but my favorite performance is Sterling Hayden. I think it's a genius comic performance. It's genius in how it's so funny without actually being funny necessarily. Like the character is a psychopath. He's willing to start World War III and potentially wipe out the entire planet in order to eliminate Russia. But his reasonings for this ungodly slaughter he's trying to commit are so ludicrous that he just comes off like some dumb crackpot who should be carrying a cardboard sign saying the end is nigh and stuff. And
exactly.
and the way Hayden plays it reminds me a lot of the way James Mason was in Lolita, where the character certainly was not funny, but I was laughing at his antics anyway. The way he goes on about commies and the precious bodily fluids. I mean, he's just a lunatic.
Yeah,
but
he basically talks about like you can pleasure a woman up to a point, but you can't really, you can't come to climax because don't share your fluids with him. And I'm like, is this guy really talking about this while bullets are whirling by his head to a British RAF officer? I was like, wow, the humor of that, just the scene of that is humorous. Not to mention the deadpan straight delivery he gives it.
Oh yeah, and Peter Sellers makes it so much funnier with his he's so terrified, but he's trying to act as though he's going along with it. Yeah, that's right, Jack. You're right about that.
He's always trying to steer the conversation too. He's like, now, Jack, about that code. Like he's constantly trying to get it back, but he's doing it with like no sense of urgency. But there's a little bit of urgency, but he's not like going to push him because he's being very proper and very British. So he's never going to be rude to this man.
For sure, and this guy Ripper is first of all, I mean, like, it just just overall, I love the names in this movie. The villain of the movie being named Jack D. Ripper. That's just classic, and and he is a great villain, and that's the thing that he kind of is like represents the whole movie, and is that the story is so dark and twisted. If you just looked at what happens via the plot, it works just as well as a thriller as a comedy. It's that's kind of the thing. Even if you're not laughing at the movie, it's like you're going along. There's some pretty decent action. There's some effects for a old 60s movie.
I had callbacks to Paths of Glory with that battle scene with the army invading the base and all that stuff. I was like, this looks exactly like that trench warfare stuff, except it's done with like shaky cam now and handheld. And I was like, what a great evolution of war documentary for Kubrick. And I mean, we can appreciate that because we watched that movie earlier this year, and now seeing it here again, it's like, oh wow, okay, he really learned how to work the camera in that situation.
For sure, that's the thing that's why Kubrick it was so good, especially. Like in this movie, it's that combination of his, of his skills as a writer and working with actors, but also his visuals. Like even though it is a comedy, the visuals are unbelievable. Like the set design by Ken Adam, that actual war room, which is just like so cavernous, as though like it's just you don't see a roof or a ceiling. It's just in space. That guy Ken Adam, he designed the Bond movies. Basically, his whole thing is like, you need a map the size of a house. Like that's what he does.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because I've been rewatching some Bond movies and stuff recently, and all of them have like the Spectre room has this, or the constant room, and I was like, holy cow, this is a Bond. And then I looked it up too, and I was like, oh, no wonder. I was like, yeah, this is what I thought those rooms looked like growing up. I mean, war games, all of that stuff. I was like, oh, it's all from this. And I'm like, Bond was 1964. That's Dr. No. They didn't really have this in Dr. No. When you get around to like From Russia with Love and Goldfinger and Thunderball and then all of the Roger Moores and all that stuff, there's always one of these map rooms. There's always one of these. I mean, hell, GoldenEye, the whole movie is pretty much in one of these things. So it's, I was like, wow, this really influenced what we thought in popular culture was the hangout of all these places. And by the way, if you've ever actually seen, and they've now declassified some of it, none of the real places look anything like this. None of them they're not as nice. They're not as spacious. They're very boring and bland.
Oh yeah, like that's like there's just such a huge difference. Like when you watch like The West Wing, which is a very realistic, down to earth kind of show, and the war room in that is actually it's a little bit nicer than just a conference room.
Holy cow! We watched our president watch the Navy SEALs shoot Osama bin Laden, and they were sitting around a conference table. With a YouTube link on an iPad, for goodness sakes. I was like, how low tech is that? You don't have a better place to watch this go down? I guess not. So that's what we have.
Yeah, it was a lot more like grandiose. It's also nice, the contrast of this very big, giant, cavernous, impressive, intimidating room, and the people inside of it are so stupid.
Well, I mean, again, that's the thing, is you have this huge room full of people, and only Kubrick would shoot a movie where only two of them talk to each other for 3/4 of it. And I was like, what the? And they're just, and I love George C. Scott. And I think this is something he did. He's just chewing that gum just like endlessly. He just keeps one more piece after another. And by the end, he's just got this wad of gum in his mouth. And I'm like, you're talking to the president. And I think you called it that earlier. Like, he has zero respect for this man, like at all. He's just there to deliver messages and whatever, that we'll get another one later. And he has nothing for Muffley Merkin as president.
Oh, yeah, and there's that great bit where he loses touch with himself when they find out there's the one plane that still made it. And the president's asking Turgison, is there a chance that plane could still make it? And he totally goes into just like a military buff mode. He starts thinking, oh, hell yeah, they could make it. You ever see one of those planes, the jet exhaust frying chickens in the barnyard? It's something to see.
Yeah.
So you think he could make it? Hell yeah, he could make it. And he realizes him making it is going to mean like the end of the world. And it's just the slow revelation on his face where he just goes quiet and covers his mouth.
Exactly.
And it's like hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. And let's talk about that plane. This is one thing Kubrick totally gets right, because I've seen the inside and like cockpits of planes and stuff like that. They are not made for comfort. Like you are, it is all about efficiency and weight on an airplane. All right, so anything that weighs something counts against it. It's very bare bones, and I think Kubrick completely captured the idea of what it would have been like to be in one of those cockpits. I find it absolutely hilarious that he picked Slim Pickens and James Earl Jones, two very tall men, to be in a service like that they would have never gotten in. Like they wouldn't have even been allowed to try for it. They're like, nope, too damn tall. To both of. But I love how you have both of these men in there. And what can you say about Slim Pickens, man? I mean, he is strictly following orders, but he's like doing everything he can to like keep morale up. And he's like, okay, go through your emergency, box. And I love everything in the box. It's like prophylactics and gum and some rubies and $100 in gold. And there's a gun with some bullets. And here's some anti-nausea medication. It's like, yeah, it's a good weekend, for a young strapping guy. But I love that he's all about the mission, and this is all played for farce. Like they've turned their radio to the super secret radio so that nobody can communicate with them, so they don't get mixed messages from the enemy, because that totally makes sense, right? Like we get that in terms of the process and procedure of this time of year. But then they get anti-aircraft flack. They get, a missile goes off by them. And this is the thing that, like, I didn't learn until later in life. I used to think, like, anti-aircraft guns and rockets were supposed to, like, hit the target. No, it's much more like a sea battle. They're really just supposed to blow up somewhere near it, because all the flak is what does the damage, and the fact that it blows all the radio equipment out and really, blows all the electronics out in the plane. They're basically flying it on hydraulics and blind. I really liked as a twist, because they finally get, we finally get the base taken over. We get the code. We're recalling the bombers, and the one we've been talking to the whole time, they're not able to hear the signal because they actually took retaliatory fire from the enemy.
Yeah, it's weird. I never thought of it till now, is that like this character of Major Kong, he's a very kind of over the top persona, but the thing about him is he's actually maybe the most competent military guy, and like he's the leader you want. He's a great boss. He's the guy you want in charge. But it's just like he's incredibly good at his job. It's just he doesn't realize that he is unintentionally being, the tip of the spear of Armageddon, and he doesn't realize he's so dedicated. It's like, I'm going to drop that bomb if it hairlips everybody on Bear Creek, because he thinks he's doing the right thing, because he's just following orders so well.
I know, and to the point that, like, at the end, he goes back to the bomb bay and releases one of the bombs manually, basically, and then rides it, like we've said, as a bull to the ground, which that was probably the iconic scene. Like, I knew that scene because it's been used over and over and parodied in so many things, right? But there's a statement in that, too. That, like, he has that line earlier, like you said, I'm going to do this no matter what the cost is. He's riding this thing to the full 8 seconds. He is going to, get on that bull and ride it the whole way down personally.
Oh yeah, it's like I said at the start of this series. Once Kubrick, got rolling, each of his films had at least, one shot or moment that has become iconic. This movie has a couple of those, like Strangelove getting out of his chair or finding his own hand. But my favorite, and it is my favorite any Kubrick film, is Major Kong physically is totally accidentally riding a hydrogen bomb to its detonation, and that shot, going back to Kubrick, and even if it's a comedy, the visuals, how all in one shot, Slim Pickens riding the bomb, that it's so quiet aside from him screaming. The quiet sound of the air whistling past, the visual effects shot of us getting closer to the ground, Major Kong screaming his guts out, waving his cowboy hat like he's trying to tame a wild horse. All this to nuclear oblivion. I think it is without a doubt the best death scene I've ever seen in a movie. Kong, in those few moments, is deciding if he's going to die, he's going to, if he's going out his way like a cowboy as the bomb heads towards its target. It's both disturbing and hilarious. And in my opinion, I think that's the best shot Stanley Kubrick ever did.
I don't know if it's the best shot he ever did. There's some in The Shining that I'll put up against it, and we'll get there, sometime in 2018, hopefully. But it is iconic, and it certainly is. If you had to symbolize this entire film's message in one shot, it's that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's it completely in one shot. and it is amazing. And it's got, it's a very simple soundtrack, and we haven't talked about it enough too. The aerial shots in this and the composites with the models and the background stuff looks amazing.
Excellent.
It's beautiful, beautiful scenery over the Urals and all that kind of stuff, which I don't know. I think he shot like the Rocky Mountains a lot or something like that.
Probably.
A mountain's a mountain in 1964. Who cares? We didn't have Wikipedia. Nobody knew. So you go with it. But I like the way all of it's put together. But I'm with you. That shot symbolizes everything this movie's about. And I almost wish it was the very end, because we still get some talkie after it's over with. But I like the fact that Kong writing that down before we get the ending song, "We'll Meet Again." I was like, well, that's dark and twisted and messed up.
Oh yeah, that's kind of the whole thing about this movie is like, it's like when I got this movie in 2007 for the first time, I didn't know anything about it. All I knew about it was the writing, the bomb scene. I didn't know it was a comedy. So I was shocked that I was laughing so much given the subject matter. Is that it's so funny. It's like it might be the most fun Kubrick movie to watch, and at the same time it is his darkest film, because the death count on the the end of the movie is like in the millions or hundreds of millions if you broke it down, and yet it's such a blast, literally.
Yeah, it's all played off as a complete laugh and a farce, but it's also horrific if you think about what you're laughing at. And certainly audiences did at the time, critics did, and I mean this movie's what, 53 years old, 54 years old now at this point we're talking about it, and it still rings true. And it's funny, history is circular, and I'm one of those people that believes that things repeat themselves. The situations and the people change and the technology changes, but the scenarios just repeat over and over throughout history. And we're back again, and hopefully we don't come to nuclear Armageddon. I mean, I think that's what none of us want, but
hopefully. Yeah,
exactly. But you can look at a film like this and see why people would make that comparison nowadays based on what we're looking at here. So I think we're at the point of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So Kurt, what are yours for Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb?
Dr. Strangelove is one of my absolute favorite movies since I first saw it in summer of 2007. I watched it so many times over that summer just because I watched it and I felt like I hadn't had that feeling watching a movie where it was so dark and yet so funny. It's really the movie that made me want to seek out Kubrick's work and make sure I see it. After, it all stems from this. It's to me he's the guy who did Dr. Strangelove. That's why I revisited 2001 at the time, and then got into Pounds of Glory, Eyes Wide Shut, and so forth. It is my favorite comedy. Maybe there's other movies that might make me laugh more these days, but it's my favorite film that happens to be a comedy. But having said that, it is still hilarious. Like I said, Peter Sellers may well be the very best at what he did. I mean, nobody makes me laugh quite like him when he's hitting that stride. Dr. Strangelove is my favorite comedy. It is my favorite film of the 1960s, and I would say right now, it's my favorite film by Stanley Kubrick. So extra large popcorn all the way.
All right, fantastic. I gotta say, I was genuinely surprised at how funny and topical and interesting I found this movie. It's very short. It's only 94 minutes long, which that surprised me too. I was like, I thought all these Kubrick movies were long. No, that starts next time. So, so we'll get into that next time. But for right now, no, this one's short and sweet, and it's carried by fantastic performances. Peter Sellers, I talked about the fact that I loved George C. Scott in this. George C. Scott's really my in on it. He was my favorite character in the thing. But all of them are good. Sterling Hayden's good. Slim Pickens is good. Even James Earl Jones, that small nothing role, is good. It's all, there's somebody you can relate to, but the story is so much fun. It's beautifully shot to be something that, again, is kind of contained. I mean, it's in a small cockpit. It's in a room with people, but then you get these great aerial shots with it too, and just the decoration, all of it works. The comedy still works. This is a film that must be seen. I'm sad that it took me this long to see it. but I'm glad I've seen it now, and it'd definitely be one that I add to the collection and watch again. So extra large popcorn for me on Dr. Strangelove. Just a fun time, and I'm glad it's a good way to end the year on Kubrick, because if Lolita had been in 2017, I'd have been real depressed, Kurt. I'm just gonna lie. Like that was I had such a bad time reviewing that film, watching that film, not reviewing it. That was fun enough with you, but like watching that, I was like, I don't think I can do any more of these. I really don't know I can do any more Kubrick. Maybe the series should just die. I don't know. So, but no, we will carry on. We're heading into 2018 now, and we've got 6 big ones in a row, and I think these are the ones that like most people are going to know Kubrick for. We got 2001: A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut, all coming up on the 2018 docket. So look forward to getting into those with you. And you've been, you've kind of turned the Fabish Factor into Superhero Central, man. You've got all those on lock.
Yeah, Fabish Factor, we're kind of up and running again, and it's just sheer coincidence. There have been a lot of genre movies and superhero movies the last little while. So after, like, we just put out the Justice League show, Thor 3 before that, but I think it's going to be, that's about it for superheroes, at least for a little while. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for a little bit, but there are always more coming out in 2018. Of course, you got one more with us this winter here. We're going to do The Last Jedi. Star Wars is coming up for us, so that one's there. And then who knows what'll come around in 2018 where we can bring you into the fold. It's always fun to have you here on the show, and certainly enjoy talking these Kubrick films with you. And I'm really, really looking forward to these back 6. Like, these are the ones I probably know the best. And there's a lot that's been said about them, and there's a lot that's been said about all of these films. So I think it's going to be fun to add our wrinkle to it as well as we get into more on Film Strip. Of course, folks, you can find all of our stuff on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com. From there, choose your podcast adventure. If you choose The Art of Slaying: Path to Redemption, you're going to see the full Buffy the Vampire Slayer retrospective and the new Angel retrospective that Brian and I have just launched here at the end of 2017. We're going through Season 1 Angel. Check that out. If you click movies, you're going to get all the Film Strip movies. You're also going to see the Fabish Factor stuff. We put it all in the same feed now, so subscribe to that on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, and you can get all of it there and get episodes as they come out. And do leave us a review on those platforms. We do this show for free. We'll always do it for free, but it's great to get feedback from folks as you enjoy the films. And if you see things that we miss, or that you don't necessarily agree with, or that you do agree with, let us know, because we enjoy interacting with you as always. Until next time, for Kurt, I'm Jay. Thanks for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. Please leave us a positive review on iTunes and link up with us on Facebook. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121.